The clock on the walls of the emergency room glowed with a pale green light and marked 4 in the morning, while time itself felt suspended in that cold space. The fluorescent lamps above drilled into my eyes as if they were knives, showing every bruise and every cut across my body. Machines hummed with sterile detachment monitors beeped in uneven rhythm, and sneakers squeaked on polished floors as nurses rushed in and out. I lay on a gurney, trembling beneath a thin blanket. My lips cracked and bleeding, my hair matted with dirt and dried blood, my skin blotched with purple and black bruises blooming like rotting flowers. Every breath burned as if shards of glass were lodged inside my lungs. I tried to speak, but only a broken rasp escaped a sound barely human. A doctor leaned over me with tired but focused eyes. Her name tag read Dr. Evelyn Harper, and even in that haze, I knew her voice would be one I remembered. She pressed her stethoscope against my chest, whispered to a nurse, and her words carried the chill of a death sentence. She was gone for 2 minutes. Survival like this almost never happens. The word gone echoed through my head like a funeral bell. I had been gone. My heart had stopped. My body had become an empty shell, and they had shocked me back not once, but 3 times before a pulse clawed its way back into rhythm. Against all odds, I was alive, though every nerve screamed that I should not be. But survival was not the story. The real story was why a 20-year-old student who should have been worried about exams and part-time shifts was lying half dead with frost still clinging to her clothes. The real story was why I had been shoved into a space meant for animals and left there to freeze. My lips trembled as I forced the words out again. He locked me with the dogs. The nurses exchanged startled glances, their eyes wide, the room going still except for the shrill beep of the monitor. For a moment, their urgency faltered, and the truth I had carried in silence for years cut through the air sharper than any scalpel. Behind my eyelids, I still saw the bars of the kennel, smelled the acrid stench of fur and filth, felt the cold ground against my skin. The padlock had clicked shut outside a final cruel sound that told me I was not a daughter or a sister, but a mutt to be caged. His voice rang in my ears even now. That is your place. The pain in my chest came not only from broken ribs, but from the years of humiliation that had led to this moment. Harold Dawson, my stepfather, had called me extra mouth since I was a child. My mother, Donna, had told me never provoke him as though his rage were my responsibility. My stepsister, Madison, had recorded my tears on her phone, sharing them for amusement while calling me loser sister. All of it had led to that night when Harold, drunk and snarling, had decided to show me exactly where I belonged. A nurse brushed strands of frozen hair from my face. Frost clung to me like shards of glass proof that I had not been saved by the family who should have protected me, but by strangers who had cut the lock and dragged me out. In the ambulance, my heart had stopped again. For 2 minutes the flatline had sung, and the world had gone black before the shocks and the desperate hands of medics pulled me back. I raised my hand weakly, IV tubes tugging at my skin, and whispered again. He locked me with the dogs. Dr. Harper bent closer, her voice steady but urgent. Julia, do you understand what happened to you? You were gone. You should not be alive. I nodded faintly, pain radiating through every limb because I did understand. I understood that my stepfather had beaten me half to death. I understood that my mother had watched without lifting a hand. I understood that my stepsister had sneered and filmed. And I understood that they had believed no one would ever care. The lights buzzed, the machines hummed, and I realized that for 20 years I had been invisible. A girl who cooked, cleaned, absorbed blows, and apologized for existing. Yet here, under the harsh brightness of a hospital surrounded by strangers who believed me more in minutes than my family had in a lifetime, I felt something crack open inside. I was no longer just the invisible daughter. I was the woman who had been shoved into a cage and left to die, the woman who clawed back from death, the woman whose survival was not an accident but a responsibility. I could not let the truth be buried again. The sound of doors swinging open echoed down the hall, and cold air swept through, making me shiver as if I were back in that kennel with chains clinking against steel. My breath hitched, but I forced my eyes open and stared at the faces leaning over me. They were strangers, but they had seen me. They had heard me. They believed me. That belief burned hotter than any shock to my chest. The story of Julia Dawson did not begin on this hospital bed. It had begun long before in a house that seemed respectable from the street, but hid cruelty within its walls. Yet it was this night when Harold Dawson pointed at a dog cage and spat that it was my place that pushed me past the edge and brought me here. In the sterile brightness, my body barely clinging to life, I felt a new certainty. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning. When I think back to my earliest memories, what should have been moments of warmth and safety are instead colored by the shadow of Harold Dawson's voice calling me extra mouth words that branded me as unnecessary from the time I was old enough to understand language. I was only 5 when my mother Donna remarried him, and at first I tried to believe that he might become a father figure, but his gaze on me was always filled with irritation, as if my presence in his house was an inconvenience he could barely tolerate. My mother used to hush me whenever I tried to defend myself. "Do not provoke him, Julia," she would say with a sigh, as though Harold's rage was a force of nature like a storm I had to endure. Those words became the refrain of my childhood, a sentence that told me my safety depended on silence. I grew up in that silence, learning to cook and clean, before I learned fractions, learning that my value lay only in making life easier for others. When Madison was born, Harold's daughter and my stepsister, the division between us grew even sharper. Madison was cherished, praised for every little achievement, spoiled with new clothes and constant attention, while I was told to be grateful for leftovers and reminded daily that I was lucky to have a roof over my head. By the time I turned 10, the roles in the household were carved into stone. Madison was the golden child, Harold's pride, Donna's excuse for enduring a volatile husband. I was the scapegoat, the invisible girl whose needs and feelings were erased in favor of keeping the peace. I still remember the first time Madison picked up a phone to record me crying after Harold had thrown my drawing into the trash. She was laughing as she pressed record, chanting "Loser Sister," while I tried to hide my face. Later, she showed the video to her friends at school, and I felt the sting of humiliation not only inside my home, but in the hallways where whispers followed me. Donna saw the video once, and instead of stopping Madison, she shook her head at me. "You need to be less dramatic, Julia. Nobody likes a girl who cries all the time." Her words were sharper than Harold's insults because they came from the person who should have been my defender. By the time I entered my teenage years, I had already been conditioned to expect cruelty. Harold slapped me once across the kitchen because the dinner was too salty, and Donna's only comment was, "Julia, you should pay more attention next time." Madison smirked from the corner, recording again, a little actress basking in the attention she gained from showcasing my humiliation. It was not only physical blows, but the constant erosion of identity. I was told not to speak at the dinner table because Harold wanted silence. I was told not to invite friends over because Madison deserved privacy. I was told not to ask for money for school supplies because Harold insisted I was wasting resources. At night, I would curl up in my bed with a cheap notebook hidden under the mattress and write secret affirmations to myself. I am Julia. I am not worthless. I deserve to live. Those words were my rebellion-fragile sentences that kept me tethered to the idea that I was more than what they told me. Yet, no matter how often I wrote them, the weight of daily degradation pressed hard. At 15, Madison had grown into Harold's perfect daughter, and she weaponized his favoritism against me. She would break a dish and point to me, and Harold would accept it as truth. She would tell him I had rolled my eyes, and suddenly I would be dragged by the arm and accused of disrespect. It did not matter that I tried to defend myself. My mother's voice would slice in cold and detached. "Julia, do not antagonize him. You always make things worse." I began to believe that maybe I truly was the cause of the storms, that if I had just been quieter, smaller, more obedient, the house might have been calm. That was the trap, the toxic cycle that kept me bound. The outside world saw our family as normal. Neighbors waved at Harold mowing the lawn, admired Donna's roses in the garden, complimented Madison's cheerleading trophies. To them, we were respectable, even enviable. Nobody saw the bruises hidden under my sleeves. Nobody heard the insults that poisoned every dinner. And I did not dare tell. At school, I pretended to be fine, though my classmates whispered about my worn clothes, and Madison spread rumors that I was unstable. I focused on books and assignments, telling myself that if I could earn a scholarship, I might escape, but every attempt to rise was cut down. When I was 17, I filled out a college application in secret and hid it under my mattress. Donna found it and shredded it in front of me, her eyes full of cold fire. "You would abandon your family after everything we have done for you." She hissed the words, stabbing deeper than any blow. "Without us, you are nothing." She left the pieces of the application scattered on the floor like confetti celebrating the death of my dream. I picked them up with trembling hands and cried until my throat was raw. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was nothing without them. I stayed. The years that followed blurred together in a cycle of servitude and suppression. At 19, I thought I had found a tiny crack of freedom with a part-time job at a cafe downtown. I loved the smell of espresso, the chatter of strangers who knew nothing of my scars. For a few hours each day, I felt almost normal, almost human. But Harold stormed into the cafe one evening, dragged me out in front of my coworkers, and accused me of neglecting the family. Donna smoothed it over with the manager by calling me irresponsible, and by the next morning I had lost the job. Independence was not allowed. Every seed of escape was crushed before it could sprout. By the time I turned 20, the weight of hopelessness pressed down heavier than ever. Madison, now 18, strutted around the house with entitlement calling me maid when Harold was not listening, threatening to post old videos of me crying if I dared to stand up for myself. Donna continued her cold complicity, praising Madison's beauty, while reminding me I was lucky to be tolerated. Harold drank more, raged louder, and used every excuse to remind me that I was unwanted. The walls of the house carried the echoes of his insults. Useless. Extra mouth. Worthless mutt. Words that carved scars deeper than bruises. Yet in the quiet hours when everyone else slept, I would still open my secret notebook. The words were shaky, written with hands that sometimes trembled from pain, but they were mine. "I am Julia Dawson. I deserve to live." Those words were the only light in the toxic darkness, and though I could not see it then, they would become the foundation for the resistance I would one day build. At 20 years old, I should have been free to carve out my own path, but instead, every step I took was chained to Harold's temper and Donna's silence. I tried to keep up with classes at community college and pick up shifts at the cafe where I had managed to get rehired, but the schedule always collided with Harold's demands. One evening, I came home late after covering for a coworker still wearing my apron and smelling of coffee grounds, and Harold was already pacing the kitchen with a bottle of beer in his hand. "Dinner late, you worthless girl," he barked, slamming the bottle on the counter so hard, foam spilled across the tiles. My mother sat at the table with her arms folded, her eyes cold. "Julia, just apologize," she said flatly, not even looking at me. Before I could open my mouth, Madison appeared with her phone raised, giggling as she recorded. TikTok caption, "She laughed my loser sister late again." The red light of the camera felt like a branding iron across my face. I tried to explain that I had been working trying to earn money for textbooks, but Harold's face twisted with rage. He backhanded the plate of food I had left on the counter, sending it crashing to the floor. "You think you are too good for this family?" he growled, grabbing my wrist so tightly I could feel the bruise forming instantly. Donna sighed as though I were the one making a scene. "Stop provoking him, Julia. Always with the excuses." Madison's laughter bubbled behind me, cruel and giddy. The humiliation was worse than the pain. That night, I wrote in my hidden notebook with shaking hands, "I am Julia. I am not worthless. I deserve to live." The words steadied me for a moment, but by morning the despair returned. This was my pattern. Each small conflict became a performance in which Harold was the enraged director, Donna the silent accomplice, and Madison the mocking audience with her phone. Sometimes it was about dinner being late. Sometimes it was about laundry not folded fast enough. Sometimes it was about my voice being too loud when I answered a question in class. No matter how trivial the trigger, the outcome was always the same. His rage, my mother's cold reprimand, my stepsister's laughter. By now, Harold no longer needed reasons. He invented them. One Saturday, I was studying at the table, highlighting passages from a sociology textbook when Harold stormed in from the yard. "You parked wrong again!" he shouted, though my small car was perfectly aligned at the curb. Without warning, he swept my books onto the floor. Donna came in, glanced at the scattered papers, and said nothing except, "Julia, why do you always make him angry?" Madison snapped a picture on her phone, and I heard the click echo like a gunshot. She posted it later with a caption, "My sister cries over homework, LOL." The comments from her friends sliced through me, proof that even beyond the walls of our house, I was ridiculed. I began to understand something then. This was not just about anger or discipline. It was about erasing me, turning me into nothing but a punchline, a scapegoat, a body to absorb blows. So Harold could feel powerful, so Donna could avoid conflict, so Madison could enjoy the privilege of being the adored daughter. I felt myself shrinking inside. At class, I avoided eye contact, terrified someone had seen Madison's posts. At work, I fumbled orders, my hands shaking as though Harold might appear at any second to drag me out. At home, I kept my head down, hoping silence would shield me, but it never did. Silence was never enough. One night, Harold came home drunk, staggering into the kitchen where I was cleaning dishes. The smell of whiskey clung to him like rot. He slammed his fist on the counter. "Where is my dinner?" he roared, though he had not told me when he would return. I pointed to the covered plate in the oven, but he yanked it out, hurled it into the sink, and shards of glass sprayed across the floor. Madison filmed from the doorway, whispering dramatic voiceover like she was narrating a comedy sketch. "My mom's pet project ruins dinner again." Donna finally spoke, but not to him. "Julia, clean this up," she said sharply, as though I had caused the explosion. My throat closed with a scream I did not release. Later in my room, I pressed the pen so hard against paper that the ink bled through. I am Julia Dawson. I am not an animal. I deserve to live. The emotional roller coaster was unbearable. I would find a sliver of hope in my classes or at the cafe, feel almost human when a kind customer smiled, only to be dragged back into the pit when I crossed the threshold of our house. The undulation between fleeting normalcy and crushing despair left me dizzy and exhausted. Yet somewhere beneath the rubble, a seed of resistance was growing. I began to keep evidence. Tiny acts of rebellion disguised as routine. A bruise photographed in the bathroom mirror. A screenshot of Madison's cruel posts saved before she deleted them. Pages of my journal hidden in a plastic bag under a loose floorboard. I told myself I was crazy for doing it, that no one would ever believe me, but the habit gave me a strange sense of control. At least I was recording the truth, even if no one cared. That truth, fragile and secret, was the only thing I could call mine. The cycle continued each week, punctuated by some new humiliation, but inside me the balance was shifting. I had lived 20 years as their scapegoat, their extra mouth, their mutt. But in the quiet moments when I reread my journal, I began to feel something sharper than despair. Anger. Not the blind rage of Harold, but a steady flame that whispered one day they will not be able to deny what they have done. One day my voice will be louder than their lies. It was a bitterly cold evening when everything boiled over, the kind of winter night where the air outside bit through coats and the wind rattled the loose panels of the garage. And inside our house, the storm was Harold's rage waiting to ignite. He had been drinking since afternoon, the smell of beer clinging to him like sweat, and by the time the sun set, his temper needed only the smallest spark. That spark came from Madison, who was scrolling through her phone at the kitchen table and smirking as I carried in a tray of rolls I had baked from scratch. She lifted her chin toward Harold and said, "Dad, you know Julia sneaks food when you are not looking. She is always stealing." Her voice was casual, taunting, designed to provoke. I froze mid-step, the tray trembling in my hands because I knew exactly what she was doing. Harold's head snapped up, his face already flushed, veins pulsing at his temples. "Is that true?" he roared, his voice shaking the air like thunder. "No," I whispered, my throat tight. I was just baking for dinner. Nothing else. But my denial meant nothing. Harold shoved back his chair so violently it crashed into the wall. "You dare lie to me in my own house!" he bellowed. In 2 strides, he was on me, his hand striking the tray from my grip so that the rolls scattered across the floor like useless crumbs. He grabbed me by the hair and yanked me forward, my knees buckling as pain shot through my scalp. Madison was already recording on her phone, her laughter sharp as knives. "Look at her!" she jeered, always pretending she is better. Donna entered the room, then drying her hands on a dish towel. Her expression was cold, detached, as though she had walked in on a stranger. "Julia, just apologize," she ordered flatly. My vision blurred with tears. I did not steal. I tried to plead, but Harold's fist slammed into my ribs and the air burst from my lungs. The next blows came faster than I could process, my head snapping back, my body staggering under his weight. "Stop making this worse," Donna muttered, but not to him. Never to him, always to me. The kitchen became a blur of fists and laughter and indifference. I fell to the ground and tried to shield my face, but Harold's boot caught my side and white light exploded in my skull. My body curled in on itself, a desperate instinct, but he was not finished. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me across the linoleum, through the hallway, down the steps into the garage where the air was colder and reeked of oil and rust. I begged with broken breath, "Please stop, please," but he only sneered. "You think you belong here," he spat. "Your place is lower than the dirt." And then he turned his eyes toward the corner where the dog kennel loomed, a steel structure large enough to hold 2 German shepherds he had once kept. The cage was old rust creeping along the edges, but the lock still gleamed. He yanked the door open and a cloud of icy air rushed out. "That's your place," he hissed, shoving me forward. I stumbled, tried to grip the frame, but his hands slammed against my back and I fell hard onto the frozen floor of the kennel. Pain shot up my spine. My palms skidded against cold metal, and before I could scramble to my feet, the door clanged shut. The sound of the padlock snapping into place was heavier than any coffin lid. My fists pounded the steel bars until my knuckles split, smearing red against frost. The kennel rattled with each desperate blow, but the lock held firm. My voice tore from my throat in raw screams. "Let me out, please." Madison's face appeared in the dim light outside her phone raised. She filmed me shaking, bleeding, caged like an animal. Then with a laugh, she slipped the phone back into her pocket, erasing the evidence moments later, though not quickly enough to erase every trace. Donna's voice drifted faint and cruel through the crack in the door. "Maybe this will teach her." The cold began to seep into my bones, stealing warmth cell by cell. My teeth clattered so hard I thought they might crack. My lungs burned with each gasp, my breath fogging before me and vanishing like hope. I clawed at the bars until my fingers numbed, until blood froze into the grooves. My eyes streamed tears that stiffened into ice on my cheeks. I pressed my forehead against the metal, begging, praying that someone, anyone would hear. Outside, Harold's heavy footsteps retreated and the garage door slammed shut, leaving me in silence, broken only by the hum of the freezer on the other side of the room. Time twisted into agony. Minutes stretched like hours as the kennel stole every fragment of warmth. My muscles convulsed violently, then slower until even shivering abandoned me. The paradoxical fire of hypothermia spread through me, a cruel trick convincing me I was burning even as I froze. Images flickered in my mind. Memories of birthdays where Madison grinned over cake while I washed dishes, evenings where Donna hissed that I was ungrateful, countless nights where I hoped for approval that never came. All of it collided into one truth. I had never been a daughter in this house. I had been a servant, a scapegoat, a mutt, and now they had placed me exactly where they thought I belonged. My body slid to the floor of the kennel limbs, stiff breath shallow. My fists stopped pounding because there was no strength left to lift them. My eyelids drooped heavy as lead. Would anyone care if I never came back? I whispered into the dark. My words froze in the air and fell silent. Somewhere outside, Madison's laughter still echoed in my ears, sharp and merciless, and my mother's indifference cut deeper than the cold. The kennel smelled of rust and old fur. The metal pressed into my skin until every nerve screamed. My body curled tighter, trying to preserve what little warmth remained, but the cold was a thief, relentless and patient. Hours might have passed, or maybe only minutes' time had dissolved. I no longer knew if my heart was beating until the rhythm faltered heavy and uneven. I realized then that I might not leave this cage alive. I thought of Uncle Robert, my mother's brother, whom I had not seen in months, and wondered if he would remember me as more than a shadow. I thought of the neighbors next door, Evelyn Carter, who sometimes waved at me with kind eyes, and wondered if she would notice my absence. I thought of myself as a little girl clutching a drawing that Harold had torn apart, crying as Madison filmed, and I wanted to tell that girl that she was worth more than this. But my lips were too stiff to move. My vision narrowed, the edges darkening like curtains closing on a stage. The last sound I heard was the rattle of the lock outside, firm and final. And then there was nothing but cold silence, absolute and merciless, wrapping around me tighter than chains. This was the night I was no longer a daughter, no longer a student, no longer human in their eyes. This was the night Harold Dawson declared that my place was with the dogs, and for a moment that stretched into eternity, I believed he had succeeded. The kennel became my coffin long before my body gave in. Every inhale felt like shards of ice carving their way into my lungs. Each exhale a shallow mist that vanished before my eyes. My jaw locked as my teeth clattered uncontrollably, the sound echoing against the steel bars. The floor beneath me was damp and filthy, carrying the stink of old urine and rust, and it seeped into my clothes until my skin felt soaked with cold. My arms wrapped around my ribs, instinctively trying to conserve whatever warmth remained, but the shivers soon turned to violent convulsions. My muscles jerked and cramped my knees, banging against the bars, and yet no one came. The silence outside was heavier than the chains that bound the lock, broken only by the faint hum of the garage freezer and the occasional distant bark of a dog from down the street. I whispered to myself between gasps, "Am I just an animal to them?" The words cracked in my throat, fragile and useless. My vision blurred as tears spilled and froze against my cheeks, tiny shards that cut when I tried to blink them away. I thought of Harold's words, his sneer as he shoved me inside. "That is your place." I remembered the look on Madison's face as she held up her phone, laughing at my humiliation, and I remembered the cold indifference in my mother's eyes, the way she muttered, "Maybe this will teach her." That memory burned sharper than the cold because it confirmed what I had always feared, that she would never choose me. The kennel seemed to close in around me, the bars pressing tighter, though they did not move, and my breaths grew shallower until each one felt like my last. My fingertips went numb, then my hands, then my arms, the sensation creeping up my body until I could barely feel myself. The pain dulled, replaced by a terrifying calm. My body stopped shivering, and the paradoxical warmth of hypothermia spread like fire under my skin. I felt as if I were burning sweat beating at my temples, even as frost clung to my hair. The cruel trick made me want to strip away my clothes, but I could not move enough to do more than clutch my chest. Images flickered in my mind like a film reel unraveling. I saw myself at 10 years old holding a crumpled drawing while Harold laughed. I saw Madison at 12 chanting "Loser Sister" as she uploaded another video of me crying. I saw my mother shredding my college application into confetti, her words slicing me open more deeply than any blow. "Without us, you are nothing." The sentence echoed through my skull, mingling with Harold's sneer, with Madison's laughter, until the voices blended into a single chorus chanting my worthlessness. My heart pounded slower and slower, each beat a heavy thud in my ears. I tried to lift my hand toward the bars again, but it fell limply to the ground. Blood from my split knuckles had frozen into dark streaks on the steel proof that I had fought even when no one would remember. My mind drifted in and out of consciousness, slipping into hallucinations that felt more real than the kennel itself. At one moment, I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup while Harold loomed behind me. At another, I was back in the classroom, my classmates laughing as Madison spread lies about me. And then I was a little girl again, hiding in the closet as Harold pounded on the door, my mother's voice floating through saying, "Stop being dramatic, Julia." The line between past and present dissolved until all I could see was a lifetime of erasure, every moment of humiliation layering over me like blankets too heavy to push away. The cold wrapped me in silence, pulling me towards surrender. I thought of Uncle Robert and his kind eyes the last time I had seen him telling me I deserved more. I thought of Evelyn next door, who sometimes smiled at me when I walked home, wondering if she would notice the absence of my footsteps. My lips moved, but no sound emerged. "Please, someone, please." The prayer hung unfinished as darkness edged closer, my vision tunneling until only the bars directly in front of me remained. The sound of my own heartbeat slowed into a weak rhythm, then faltered. I heard it as a thud followed by a hollow pause. My chest tightened, my body convulsed once more, and then stillness spread. The world muted into nothing but the scrape of my nails dragging across steel, a final mark carved into the frost. My consciousness slipped fully, then a black ocean swallowing me whole. For a moment there was relief in the surrender. No more pain, no more humiliation, no more fighting to breathe. The kennel became weightless around me, fading into shadow. Somewhere far away, a sound tried to break through a muffled noise like voices, but my body was too weak to respond. My lips were frozen, my limbs numb, my pulse fading into silence. In that suspended darkness, I believed this was the end, that I would never walk out of that cage, that Harold's words had finally come true. I belonged in the dog cage, invisible, erased, and with that thought echoing in the last corner of my mind, the darkness closed in completely. The darkness might have claimed me entirely if not for the sound that filtered through the storm, faint at first, then sharper like a distant knock against metal. My mind tried to dismiss it as another cruel hallucination, but the noise grew into something undeniable, a pounding rhythm that did not belong to my failing heartbeat. On the other side of the garage wall, Evelyn Carter was awake, restless in her own home as the wind rattled her shutters. She had gone to fetch firewood when she heard the strange, dull banging and then a silence that felt too heavy. Her instincts told her something was wrong. She called out, but no one answered. At 12:15, she dialed 911. Her voice urgent as she told the dispatcher that her neighbor's garage sounded alive with something that should not be there. Within minutes, the wail of sirens split the night, flashing lights, painting the snow in red and blue. I did not hear them, my body already limp, my pulse thready and fading, but those sirens carried the chance of survival. Police officers forced their way into the Dawson house, Harold and Donna stammering half-drunk excuses at the door. The officers swept through the kitchen down into the garage, and their flashlights caught the gleam of the padlock on the kennel. One officer struck it with a baton while another fetched bolt cutters. The lock snapped and the door swung open, releasing a cloud of frost, and the broken figure of me crumpled on the floor. Skin-blue lips, cracked blood frozen to my hands where I had beaten the bars. I looked less like a living girl than a body already gone. "She is unresponsive," one officer muttered. "Get EMS now." The paramedics rushed in, cutting away my frozen clothes, attaching leads to my chest, searching for a pulse that flickered like a dying candle. They pressed warm IV fluids into my veins, rubbed my limbs to coax circulation, and worked furiously inside the ambulance as snow swirled around them. At one point, the monitor flatlined again, and for 2 eternal minutes the tone of death sang through the cabin. "Come on, come back," one medic urged, pressing hard against my chest. Against all probability, a weak rhythm sparked back. Barely there, but there. At 1:40 in the morning, I was wheeled into the emergency room where Dr. Evelyn Harper was waiting. Her face was calm from years of practice, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear as she looked at me. "Core temperature dangerously low, heart, barely registering," she said to the team. They began protocols, layering heated blankets over me, running warmed fluids, continuing compressions when my pulse dipped again. My body convulsed under shock wires clinging to my skin until finally the monitor gave a stuttering beep. "She is back," someone whispered in awe. When my eyes fluttered open under the fluorescent glare, it was nearly 4 a.m. The first thing I saw was Dr. Harper leaning close, her voice a mixture of awe and exhaustion. "You were gone," she whispered. "You should not be here, but you are. It is a miracle." Her words anchored me to the world again, tethered me against the pull of nothingness. My lips trembled as I forced them to part. "He locked me with the dogs." The words came out ragged but clear. A nurse froze with a syringe in her hand, staring. Another looked at Dr. Harper, eyes wide. The truth had broken free at last. My body lay bandaged and bruised tubes snaking from my arms, but my voice had clawed its way into the sterile air. Dr. Harper leaned closer, meeting my eyes. "Julia, do you understand what happened? You were dead for 2 minutes." I nodded weakly, though every nerve screamed with pain. I understood too well. Harold had beaten me until I could not stand. He had shoved me into the kennel like an animal and padlocked the door. Donna had looked on without lifting a finger. Madison had filmed and laughed, and they all had believed no one would ever care. Yet strangers had broken the lock. Neighbors had called for help. Paramedics had fought against death. A doctor had refused to give up. In their hands, I had been seen and saved more than my family had ever seen me in 2 decades. As machines hummed beside me and monitors beeped steady, a realization spread through me. My survival was not an accident. It was responsibility. The truth was bigger than me now. It could not be buried again. I had been locked with the dogs left for dead, but I was alive. And for the first time in my life, I felt something stronger than fear take root inside me. Resolve. By the time dawn seeped through the hospital blinds, the story Harold and Donna prepared was already rehearsed. They arrived at the emergency ward together, Harold with his jaw clenched and eyes bloodshot from drink, Donna with a bouquet of lilies clutched tightly as if flowers could erase the truth. To the nurses, they wore masks of concern, voices dripping with false worry. "She is dramatic," Harold said with a dismissive wave. She must have slipped and locked herself in there by mistake. Donna leaned close to a nurse, lowering her tone to one of exasperated sympathy. "Julia has always been careless. She insisted, always looking for attention." My stepsister Madison trailed behind them, her mascara smudged as though she had been crying, though the shine in her eyes told a different story. She clung to Donna's sleeve and sniffled loudly. "I just do not want people to think badly of us," she whimpered, her performance carefully calibrated. But standing at the edge of the room was Evelyn Carter, her coat still buttoned, her expression hard. She had been the one to call 911. She had seen Harold pacing in the driveway when the sirens arrived. She had heard the muffled screams through the garage wall. Her gaze never left him sharp and unyielding, and for the first time, Harold shifted uncomfortably under someone else's scrutiny. Detective Laura Simmons entered the room mid-morning, a woman with keen eyes and a presence that cut through pretense like glass. She greeted Dr. Harper, flipped open a notepad, and then turned to me. "Julia, can you tell me what happened?" she asked calmly. My throat burned with every word, but I whispered hoarsely. "He locked me with the dogs. He hit me until I could not stand, and then he locked me in the kennel." Donna gasped theatrically, pressing a hand to her chest. "Julia, how can you say such things?" She scolded, her voice dripping with wounded motherly sorrow. Madison's eyes widened with feigned horror. "Dad would never do that," she said quickly. "He was just upset. You must have misunderstood." Harold leaned forward, his face darkening. "She is confused," he said coldly. "She has always made up stories when she wants pity." But Detective Simmons did not flinch. Her pen moved steadily across the page as she listened, her eyes flicking between my bruises, the bandages on my hands, the raw frostbite scars, and the family who dismissed them so easily. She asked no further questions then, but her silence was louder than their excuses. Later, when the family thought the detectives had left, I heard Harold hiss at Donna in the hallway. She had better shut her mouth. Donna murmured back, she knows better than to cross us. What they did not realize was that I was no longer the silent scapegoat. I had whispered the truth aloud, and Detective Simmons had heard it. That knowledge gave me strength even as I lay weak and aching. The gaslighting continued. Donna returned to my bedside alone that evening, setting the lilies on the table. Her voice was soft, almost tender, but her words cut sharp. Julia, you must not make this into something it is not. People are already whispering. You know how careless you can be. If you insist on telling wild stories, it will destroy this family. Think about Madison. Think about Harold. Think about me. Her eyes glittered with something colder than fear. It was not a plea, but a threat. She wanted me to carry their silence like shackles once again. I looked at her without answering, my gaze steady. For the first time, she shifted, discomfort flickering across her perfect facade. My silence was not obedience now. It was defiance. That night, I overheard their whispers outside my room. If she talks, Harold muttered, we are finished. She will not. Donna replied quickly, she knows better. But I had already pressed the record button on my phone beneath the blanket, the small red icon glowing faintly. Every poisonous word captured, every threat logged. My hands trembled around the device, not with fear this time, but with the weight of resolve. For 20 years they had told me to be quiet. Now I had proof that silence was never mine, it was their weapon. This was the beginning of my fight back. The days that followed blurred into a haze of IV drips, whispered threats, and the constant beep of machines, but beneath the surface of exhaustion, a quiet plan was forming. I knew survival alone would not protect me. If I simply endured, Harold would try again. Donna would excuse him again, and Madison would laugh again. I had lived 20 years in that cycle and nearly died in it. Now I understood that my only weapon was truth. And truth had to be documented, undeniable, louder than their lies. Each morning, when the nurses changed my bandages, I angled my phone to capture the bruises mottling my ribs and the frostbite gnawing at my fingertips. Each night before sleep, I whispered into the recorder, retelling every detail from the beating to the kennel to the moment the lock snapped open. I kept my words clear and calm, as if narrating evidence for a jury I had not yet seen. Evelyn visited daily, her kind eyes fierce with determination. I saw him. Julia, she said firmly. I saw Harold drag you into that garage before the sirens came. If they need my statement, I will give it. Her voice carried a conviction that strengthened me more than any medicine. When Detective Simmons returned, she asked questions with the precision of someone who had no patience for pretense. Had Harold struck you before, Julia? Had Donna ever intervened? Had Madison encouraged it? I answered each question despite the pain, my voice steady. Yes, yes, yes. Simmons wrote quickly, her eyes narrowing. She promised to follow up, and I believed her because she looked at me the way no one in my family ever had, as though my words mattered. Madison was called in for questioning 2 days later. She strutted into the hospital room with false bravado, but her hands shook as she adjusted her phone. The detective's questions cut cleanly. Did you see your father place Julia in the kennel? Madison scoffed. He just wanted to teach her a lesson, she blurted, and then froze. The slip hung heavy in the air, an admission disguised as defense. Simmons caught it immediately, her pen scratching across the pad. Madison stammered excuses, but the damage was done. For the first time, her loyalty to Harold faltered, and I saw the crack of fear in her polished mask. The knowledge gave me fuel. Uncle Robert arrived soon after his presence, filling the room with warmth I had not known in years. He clasped my hand gently, careful of the bandages. Clara. He paused, catching himself, then smiled. Julia, I am so sorry I was not here sooner. I saw the news. They are calling it an accident, but I know better. I blinked back tears as I told him everything, my words halting but clear. He listened without interruption, fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. When I played him the recording of Harold and Donna whispering in the hallway, his jaw tightened. You cannot face this alone, he said firmly. I will stand with you. My chest ached, but not from injury. It was the ache of hope, fragile but real. Together we gathered pieces of truth like stones for a foundation. The photos of my bruises. The medical report Dr. Harper wrote that detailed injuries consistent with confinement and assault. Evelyn's testimony about what she had seen. Madison's careless slip captured in Detective Simmons's notes. Every piece was a thread in a web they could not escape. Donna tried once more to manipulate me, her voice sweet as she set a blanket on my lap. Julia, if you tell these wild stories, you will regret it. Think about Madison's future. Think about Harold's reputation. Think about me. My pulse quickened, but I met her gaze steadily. I let the recorder in my pocket capture every syllable. Later, when Robert returned, I played it for him. His eyes hardened. "This is the rope that will hang them," he said grimly. Still, the fear lingered in me. What if no one believed? What if the recordings were dismissed, the bruises ignored, the testimony twisted? But Robert reminded me that silence had never saved me, only endangered me. If I wanted to live, I had to fight. We devised a plan that was both simple and daring. Robert would host a dinner inviting close relatives and neighbors under the guise of celebrating my survival. Harold and Donna, arrogant and confident in their lies, would not suspect. Evelyn agreed to attend, ready to speak openly. Simmons promised to observe quietly if we needed, and I would bring the truth. I would play the recordings. I would show the photographs. I would expose the lies in front of everyone, leaving no room for gaslighting. The thought terrified me. My hands shook as I imagined Harold's rage, Donna's icy glare, Madison's shrieks. But then I remembered the cold of the kennel, the silence of death pressing against me, and the fear shifted into something stronger. Resolve. For the first time in 20 years, I was not just surviving. I was preparing to fight back. The night of the so-called celebration arrived, draped in December chill, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and reminded me of the kennel, but this time I carried fire in my veins instead of fear. Robert's house glowed warmly with candles and the low hum of conversation as relatives and neighbors filed in, shrugging off coats and exchanging greetings. To them, it seemed like an ordinary dinner to honor my recovery. To me, it was the stage where years of silence would finally shatter. Harold and Donna arrived first. Harold puffed up with smug confidence, Donna carrying a pie as if sweetness could disguise cruelty. Madison trailed behind in a dress too short for the weather, her phone clutched in her hand, eyes scanning the room like a predator looking for an angle. They smiled at guests, embraced distant cousins, and settled at the table as if nothing dark had ever crossed our family. Evelyn sat quietly near the end, her posture, steady eyes flicking to me with encouragement. My heart pounded as Robert tapped his glass. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said clearly. "We honor Julia's recovery, but more importantly, we honor truth." A hush fell over the room. Harold smirked, raising his glass in mock agreement. Donna's smile stiffened, sensing something beneath the words. I rose slowly, my legs trembling but my spine straight. For years I have carried the weight of silence, I began, my voice shaking but steadying as I went on. 2 weeks ago, that silence nearly killed me. Then I reached into my pocket and placed a small recorder on the table. With a press of a button, Harold's voice filled the room, low and venomous. "If she talks, we are finished." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Donna's face drained of color. Another clip followed her own voice, sharp and cold. "If you betray this family, you will regret it." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Harold slammed his fist on the table. Out of context, he barked. "Lies." Robert raised his hand calmly. "Sit down, Harold. Let her finish." My hands trembled as I placed photos on the table. Images of my bruised ribs, my frostbitten hands, the medical report signed by Dr. Harper detailing forced confinement and prolonged exposure to cold. Guests leaned in, gasps escaping lips. Evelyn stood, then her voice clear. "I saw him drag her into that garage. I heard her cries. She would be dead if not for the police." Madison's face blanched, her bravado cracking. Guests turned to her, questions firing like arrows. "Did you see? Did you film? Did you know?" Her lips quivered, and finally the words spilled out. "He just wanted to punish her," she sobbed. The confession hung heavy in the room. A cousin at the far end lifted his phone, revealing he had been live streaming the entire moment. Already, hundreds were watching, comments scrolling across the screen. "Lock him up! Poor Julia! How could a mother allow this?" Donna shot to her feet. "Turn that off," she snapped. "This is family business." "No," I said firmly, my voice breaking but strong. "This is attempted murder." The live stream continued, the numbers climbing into thousands. Reporters tuned in, neighbors outside whispered to cameras. By 8 o'clock, the story was headline news. Local woman claims stepfather locked her in dog cage. Evidence live streamed. Neighbors confirm abuse. The facade Harold and Donna had cultivated for decades collapsed in real time. Guests pushed their chairs back, staring in horror at the family they thought they knew. Evelyn's voice cut through. "You do not get to hide behind respectability anymore." Madison sobbed into her hands. Harold tried to lunge across the table to snatch the phone, but Robert and 2 cousins held him back. "Enough," Robert commanded. "The world is watching now." Outside, the flashing of cameras painted the windows. Reporters gathered microphones ready. By 9 o'clock, Detective Simmons stepped through the door, her expression firm, her presence like a blade. She surveyed the room, the recordings, the photos, the live stream still rolling, then turned to Harold and Donna. "We will need to talk," she said evenly. Her words carried inevitability. The cage they had once locked me in had now closed around them. Public exposure had done what silence never could. For the first time, I was not the invisible girl in the corner. I was the woman standing in the light, my voice amplified by thousands, my truth undeniable. And Harold Dawson, the man who told me my place was in a kennel, now faced his own confinement, one built not of steel bars, but of justice. The days that followed the dinner felt like stepping into another reality where the shadows of lies could no longer shield Harold and Donna. By morning, the video had been shared across town, then across the state, until my name became a headline and my story a rallying cry. Police cars arrived at Robert's house just after sunrise, their lights flashing against the snow as cameras crowded the street. Harold was led out in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage, spitting curses I could not hear over the shouts of reporters. Donna followed, her head bowed, her face pale, clinging to the illusion of dignity even as neighbors shook their heads. Madison clung to her mother at first, but was quickly separated, her tearful protests drowned out by the chaos. I watched from Robert's window, trembling not with fear this time, but with the gravity of truth finally being seen. Detective Simmons entered the house later, setting a folder on the table in front of me. "Julia," she said, "we are charging Harold Dawson with attempted murder, false imprisonment, and domestic abuse. Donna Dawson will face charges of complicity and obstruction." The words landed heavy but liberating. Attempted murder. It was the label I had always known in my bones, but hearing it confirmed by law nearly brought me to my knees. Robert placed his hand on mine, steadying me. "The prosecutor has already agreed to push the case forward," Simmons added. "Public attention makes it impossible to bury." In the weeks that followed, the case consumed the county. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, supporters held signs that read, "Justice for Julia," and "Silence is not survival." Some skeptics lingered at the edges, muttering about family business, but their voices were drowned by chants for accountability. Inside the courtroom, Harold sat at the defense table, his shoulders squared but his eyes full of venom. Donna kept her head low, her lips pressed into a tight line. Madison was called as a witness, and though she tried to twist her words, the recordings of her slip and the live stream footage left no doubt. Evelyn testified with calm clarity, describing what she had seen that night and in years past. Dr. Harper took the stand, her medical report precise as she detailed frostbite bruising and trauma consistent with confinement. The jury listened, their expressions hardening with every piece of evidence. The defense attempted to paint me as unstable, a young woman desperate for attention, but the live stream betrayed them. Harold's own words, "She belongs in the dog cage," echoed through the courtroom, undeniable. When the verdict was finally read, the air itself seemed to still. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Harold Dawson was sentenced to decades behind bars. Donna Dawson was convicted of complicity and obstruction, sentenced to years that stripped her of reputation and respectability. Madison, though spared prison for cooperating as a witness, faced her own punishment in the court of public opinion. Friends abandoned her colleges, withdrew offers, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She had been the girl who filmed her sister's torment and laughed. That stain would not fade quickly. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt tears stream down my face, not of sorrow, but of release. For the first time in 20 years, the law stood on my side. For the first time, the voices that had silenced me were silenced themselves. Walking out of the courthouse into the winter air, I was met with applause from strangers. Some reached to touch my hand. Others simply nodded with tears in their eyes. Reporters called my name, microphones thrust forward, but I ignored them all, focusing only on the sound of my own footsteps, steady and strong. The cage Harold had chosen for me had failed. Now it was his turn to live behind bars. Justice had arrived not in whispers or excuses, but in verdicts and sentences and headlines and community outcry. And though the scars on my skin remained, they no longer marked me as invisible. They marked me as a survivor who had dragged truth into the light and watched the abusers crumble beneath it. After the verdict, the world felt strangely quiet, as if the noise of the trial had been a storm, and now only the calm remained. I moved into Robert's house permanently, at first the safety of his walls and his steady presence a balm after years of chaos. Each morning I woke to the smell of coffee instead of beer, to the sound of birds instead of Harold's rage. But healing was not instant. Nightmares clawed at me, replaying the moment the padlock clicked shut, or the cold gnawed at my bones. I often woke drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, my hands clutching the sheets, as if still clawing at steel bars. Robert would sit with me in the kitchen at 2 a.m, pouring tea, and reminding me that nightmares are memories trying to leave. Evelyn became more than a neighbor. She became the mother I had never had. She visited often, bringing casseroles and blankets, sitting beside me in silence when words felt too heavy. One afternoon she placed her hand over mine and said, "Julia, you are safe now, truly safe." Her voice cracked and tears filled her eyes, and I realized then that she had carried the weight of watching from next door, powerless for years. Her guilt transformed into fierce loyalty, and in her presence I felt the kind of unconditional care that Donna had never offered. Therapy sessions became another lifeline. At first, I resisted, afraid to reopen wounds, but my counselor gently guided me through the tangled roots of trauma. "You are not weak for surviving, Julia," she reminded me. "You are strong for still being here." I began to see survival not as shame, but as proof of resilience. Group meetings with other survivors reinforced that lesson. I listened as women spoke of bruises hidden under makeup, of gaslighting that convinced them their pain was imagined, of children forced to witness cruelty. When it was my turn, my voice trembled as I said, "My stepfather locked me in a dog cage. My mother told me I deserved it." Gasps rippled around the circle, but instead of disbelief came nods of recognition. A woman reached out and touched my arm. "You are safe now," she whispered. That night I cried not from fear, but from the release of being believed. Slowly I returned to school. My books once again spread across a desk, my hands steady as I highlighted passages. I chose sociology as my focus, determined to understand the structures that allow abuse to fester unseen. At the cafe, where I picked up shifts again, co-workers welcomed me with smiles instead of pity. For the first time, work felt like a step toward independence rather than a risk of punishment. Cooking, once a tool of servitude, became a form of healing. I invited friends from the support group over for simple meals, soups, and breads shared not out of obligation, but choice. One evening, as laughter filled Robert's dining room, I stirred a pot and realized I was no longer cooking to appease critics. I was cooking to nourish people who cared. The difference was profound. Madison reached out once through a letter slipped into Robert's mailbox. She wrote that she was sorry that she had been afraid of Harold, that she had joined his cruelty because silence felt like survival. I read the words with trembling hands. Part of me burned with anger at the damage she had done. Another part pitied the girl raised to mirror her father's contempt. I did not reply, not yet. Healing meant boundaries, and I was not ready to reopen that door. As winter turned to spring, I moved into a small apartment of my own. It was not grand, just a one-bedroom with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was mine. I painted the walls a warm yellow, placed flowers on the balcony, and filled shelves with books I had chosen for myself. Each choice, however small, felt like rebellion against years of control. Freedom lived in those choices. On the anniversary of the trial, supporters gathered outside the courthouse with candles holding signs that read, "No more cages," and "We believe Julia." I stood among them, tears streaming as voices rose in unison. For the first time, I felt not just like a survivor, but part of something larger, a movement louder than any one story. As the candles flickered, I whispered to myself, "I am alive, I am free, and I am not afraid of the cold anymore." The girl who once cowered in silence had been buried in that kennel. The woman standing now had been reborn. When the year came full circle, I decided to speak not just in courtrooms or in therapy rooms, but directly to the world. On Thanksgiving afternoon, I set my phone on the counter of my small apartment, the yellow walls glowing behind me, the table set with simple dishes prepared with love rather than fear. Robert Evelyn and a few close friends sat nearby, offering encouragement. With trembling fingers, I tapped start on the live stream. "My name is Julia Dawson." I began, my voice steady, though my hands shook. "Some of you know my story because it went viral. Some of you do not. I survived being beaten half dead by my stepfather and locked in a dog cage while my mother stood by. I survived 2 minutes without a heartbeat. I survived the lies that followed. But I am here to tell you that survival is not enough. Healing is possible, justice is possible, and no one deserves to be invisible in their own family." Comments poured in immediately. "We stand with you, Julia. You are a miracle. I went through this too. Thank you for speaking." My chest ached with a mix of grief and gratitude as I continued. I used to think my worth depended on staying quiet, on serving others, on never complaining. But when silence nearly cost me my life, I realized the truth. Family is not who locks you in cages. Family is who keeps you safe when life tries to freeze you out. Some voices in the comments were skeptical. Why air family laundry online? She should have left earlier. This is just attention-seeking. For a moment, the sting of those words pierced deep, but I steadied myself, remembering the nights in therapy, remembering Evelyn's unwavering belief, remembering the jury's verdict. I looked straight into the camera. Leaving is not always simple. Fear is a prison. Silence is a weapon. Sometimes, survival means staying until you cannot anymore. If you have never been there, I hope you never have to understand. And if you have, know this, you are not alone. The comment section shifted again, supporters defending me. "Do not blame the victim. You are brave for speaking truth. Ignore the noise. We believe you." The solidarity swelled into a tide that drowned out the few who tried to diminish me. By the time I finished, more than 30,000 people had tuned in. Some were survivors, some were allies, some were simply curious, but all had heard my voice unfiltered and unbroken. I closed the live stream in tears, Robert pulling me into a hug. "You did it," he whispered. "You took back the story." I nodded against his shoulder. This time, it was on my terms. In the days that followed, messages flooded my inbox. Survivors wrote long letters about their own journeys. One said, "I left my husband today because you gave me the push I needed." Another said, "Your story saved my daughter." Even strangers who had never known abuse thanked me for opening their eyes. There were still critics, of course, anonymous voices mocking me, but for every cruel comment, dozens of kind ones followed. For every shadow, there was a light. Months later, when I walked into the support group, women greeted me not as a victim, but as a leader. "Your live stream changed everything," one said. "People are talking about us now, not hiding us." It was then I realized that my story had moved beyond me. It had become part of a collective fight, a chorus of voices demanding to be heard. On the anniversary of my survival, I returned to the kennel, now rusting and abandoned. I stood before it and placed my hand on the cold metal. "You did not win," I whispered. The echo of my breath lingered, but no longer carried fear, only defiance. That night, back in my apartment, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in white. Inside, warmth spread through me, steady and unshakable. I remembered Dr. Harper's words, "Do not waste that miracle." And I knew I had not. I ended the year with a promise whispered into the quiet room. I will keep speaking. I will keep living. And I will never disappear. To everyone watching my story now, whether through a screen or through the retelling of others, I ask you this. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever been told you were nothing, that your place was less than human? If so, know this: your story matters. Speak it. Share it. Do not let silence be your cage. Because family is not defined by blood or by fear. Family is defined by care, by safety, by love. And every single one of us deserves that. You are not alone. You are never alone.